The old man's hand trembled, not just from age, but from a desperate, gnawing hunger that had hollowed out his cheeks and stolen the light from his eyes. He stood by the chrome fender of a Harley-Davidson, a ghost haunting the edges of the diner's parking lot. His gaze was fixed on the half-eaten burger on the biker's plate, left on the outdoor table. "Please," he whispered, the word a dry rasp. "Just the leftovers." The biker, a mountain of a man with a leather cut proclaiming his allegiance to the Hells Angels, didn't look up. His name was Bear, and his silence was more intimidating than any shout. He slowly, deliberately, finished his cigarette, the orange glow reflecting in his dark sunglasses. The other bikers at the table froze, their own conversations dying in their throats. This was their president, and his quiet moods were storms gathering on the horizon. Inside the diner, Maya wiped down the counter, her movements automatic. She'd seen this old man before, every day like clockwork. He'd appear around lunchtime, a stooped figure in a threadbare coat, no matter the weather. He never came inside. He just waited, his hope a fragile, flickering candle against the wind of indifference. Most people ignored him. Some shot him in disgust. But today was different. Today, he approached the angels. It was like a mouse asking a lion for a scrap of its kill. Maya held her breath. She saw Bear's hand move, not towards the plate, but to the wallet chained to his belt. He pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and tossed it onto the asphalt near the old man's worn-out shoes. "Go buy your own," Bear grunted, his voice a low rumble of gravel. He turned back to his conversation, a clear dismissal. The old man, whose name was Arthur, flinched as if struck. He stared at the money, then back at the biker, a film of shame clouding his eyes. He didn't bend to pick it up. Instead, he turned and shuffled away, his shoulders slumped in a defeat so profound it made Maya's chest ache. The $20 bill lay on the ground, a small green monument to a wounded pride. Maya watched him go, her heart sinking. She knew something Bear didn't. She had seen the fresh, ugly bruise blooming on the old man's temple, partially hidden by his thin, white hair. She had seen the way his eyes darted around, not with the simple anxiety of a beggar, but with the deep, ingrained terror of a hunted animal. This wasn't just about hunger. This was about fear. The routine was the only thing that made sense in the chaos of the roadside diner. Trucks hissed to a stop, their air brakes sighing. Families tumbled out of minivans, a whirlwind of noise and spilled soda. And through it all, there were two constants, Arthur and the angels. Maya had been working at the Starlight Diner for a year, saving up for community college with a vague dream of becoming a nurse. She was a watcher by nature, quiet and observant. From her post behind the counter, she learned the rhythms of her customers. She knew who wanted their coffee black and their toast burnt. She knew which truckers were lonely and just wanted someone to talk to for 10 minutes. She knew Arthur. She knew he appeared at 12:15 p.m. every day and lingered by the edge of the parking lot until 2 p.m. He scavenged, but with a quiet dignity that broke her heart. He'd check the outdoor trash cans only after the lunch rush had cleared, his movements swift and furtive, as if ashamed to be seen. On the rare occasion someone offered him food, he'd accept it with a nod, his eyes downcast, and retreat to the scraggly patch of trees behind the diner to eat in solitude. And she knew the bikers. The local Hells Angels charter used the Starlight as their unofficial clubhouse. They'd roll in around noon, a dozen engines roaring in unison, and take over the back corner booths. They were loud, they were intimidating, but they were also good customers. They tipped well, treated Maya with a gruff sort of respect, and never caused any real trouble. Their leader, Bear, was the quiet center of their storm. He rarely spoke more than a few words, but his presence commanded absolute authority. A single glance from him could silence the rowdiest prospect. Maya saw the way they looked at him, with a mixture of fear and unwavering loyalty. He was their protector, their king. The two worlds never touched. The bikers existed in their bubble of leather and chrome, and Arthur existed in his shadow of hunger and shame, until the day he asked for the burger. Maya couldn't shake the image of his retreat, the way he had left the money lying on the ground. It wasn't the act of a man desperate for a meal. It was the act of a man for whom a shred of dignity was the last thing he had left to lose. That night, Maya started packing him a small lunch, a simple sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water. The next day, when she saw him by the trees, she walked out on her break. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice startling him. He looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. I ordered too much food. I don't want it to go to waste. Would you like it?" She held out the brown paper bag. He stared at it, then at her, his gaze searching. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a simple, honest offer. Slowly, he reached out a trembling hand and took the bag. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. He didn't say anything else. He just took the food and disappeared back into the trees. Maya did it again the next day, and the next. It became their silent ritual. It was during the third week of their unspoken arrangement that she saw it. She was handing him the bag when his sleeve slid back, revealing a wrist mottled with dark, finger-shaped bruises. They were fresh. Arthur saw her gaze lock onto them, and quickly pulled his sleeve down, his face flushing with a deep, painful shame. He snatched the bag and turned away before she could say a word. The next day, a sleek, late-model sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man in his 40s, with a sour, pinched face and clothes that were too expensive for his demeanor, got out of the driver's side. He stormed over to Arthur, who was waiting in his usual spot. Maya watched through the diner window, her hands freezing while polishing a coffee pot. "What are you doing?" the man hissed, his voice low but venomous. "I told you to stay away from here. You're embarrassing me." Arthur mumbled something, his head bowed. The man grabbed his arm, his fingers digging in. "I give you a roof over your head. I feed you. And this is how you repay me? Panhandling like some bum?" He shoved Arthur toward the car. "Get in. You're not getting a cent from me this week. Maybe a little hunger will remind you to be grateful." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. The man wasn't a stranger. The cruelty was familiar, practiced. Maya felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was the source of the bruises. This was the reason for the fear. The man was stealing from him, starving him, and using his pension for himself, leaving this old, frail man with nothing. She watched the sedan speed away, leaving a puff of exhaust in its wake. Arthur was trapped. And Maya, a 19-year-old waitress, was the only one who seemed to have noticed. What can you do when you see an injustice so blatant, yet so hidden? Do you turn away, telling yourself it's not your business? Or do you step forward, knowing you might be stepping into danger? We all face these moments. If you've ever had to make that choice, let me know in the comments what you did, and if you believe that one small voice can make a difference, make sure to like this video and subscribe. You never know when you'll be the one who needs to speak up. For 2 days, Arthur didn't appear. The parking lot felt empty without his silent, hopeful presence. Maya's anxiety grew with each passing hour. The sandwich she made for him sat on the prep counter, a sad reminder of her own powerlessness. She thought about calling the police, but what could she say? I saw a man being mean to his elderly uncle. She had no proof, no names, nothing but a gut feeling, and the ghost of bruises on a thin wrist. They wouldn't do anything. On the third day, he was back. He looked worse than ever. The bruise on his temple was darker, and there was a new cut on his lip. He moved with a painful stiffness, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. He didn't wait by the trees. He went straight to the trash can, his earlier shame replaced by a raw, desperate need. Maya's heart shattered. The nephew, or whoever he was, had broken his spirit completely. She saw the angels roll in, their engines a familiar growl. Bear swung his leg over his bike and walked toward the entrance, his eyes sweeping the lot. His gaze fell on Arthur, who was pulling a half-eaten bag of fries from the bin. The bear stopped. He didn't move, just watched. Maya saw a flicker of something in his posture. Not disgust, but something else. A stillness. An observation. He remembered the old man who had refused his $20. This was her moment. It was now or never. Her hands were sweating, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She untied her apron, her fingers fumbling with the knot. "Gary, cover for me," she mumbled to the cook, who just grunted in reply. She walked out the diner door, the bell jingling softly behind her. The air was thick with the smell of asphalt and exhaust. The bikers by the door watched her approach their leader, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She ignored them. Her focus was entirely on the wall of leather and muscle in front of her. Bear was taller up close, an imposing figure who blocked out the sun. She had to crane her neck to look up at his face, which was unreadable behind his sunglasses. "Bear?" she said, her voice barely a squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "My name is Maya. I work inside." He just nodded, waiting. The silence stretched, amplifying the frantic beat of her own pulse. She had to force the words out. "It's about that old man," she said, gesturing with a shaky hand toward Arthur, who was now hidden from their view behind the dumpster. "His name is Arthur. He's not just a beggar. Someone is hurting him." She told him everything. She told him about the daily lunches, the bruises on his wrist, the cruel man in the sedan, the overheard threats. Her words tumbled out in a rushed, panicked stream. She explained how the man was starving him, likely stealing his Social Security or pension checks, and how Arthur was too scared and too broken to do anything about it. She felt tears welling in her eyes, born of frustration and fear. "I didn't know who else to tell," she finished, her voice trembling. "The police. They won't listen. But you guys, you see things. I thought maybe you could help." She stood there, exposed and vulnerable, having placed her faith in a man who was the living embodiment of danger. He hadn't moved a muscle the entire time she spoke. The silence that followed her plea was absolute. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to laugh at her, or tell her to get lost. Then he did something unexpected. He slowly reached up and took off his sunglasses. His eyes were a surprisingly clear, intelligent blue. They weren't cold or cruel. They were thoughtful. He looked past her, his gaze finding Arthur, who was now sitting on the curb behind the diner, eating the discarded fries. He watched him for a long, silent moment. Finally, he looked back down at Maya. His expression was grim. "What time does this guy usually show up?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a promise. A dark, heavy promise. The next afternoon felt like the calm before a hurricane. Maya went about her duties in a fog of nervous energy, her eyes constantly darting to the clock in the parking lot. The angels were there, in their usual booths, but the atmosphere was different. Their usual boisterous laughter was gone, replaced by a low, tense murmur. They were waiting. Bear sat in his corner, nursing a single cup of black coffee, his gaze fixed on the entrance to the lot. He looked like a predator, waiting for its prey to wander into the trap. At 1:30 p.m., the sleek black sedan pulled in. The man, whose name Maya later learned was Vincent, got out and immediately spotted Arthur talking to one of the younger bikers, a prospect named Stitch. Stitch was just making small talk, but Vincent's face contorted with rage. He stomped over, his movements jerky with anger. "What did I tell you?" he spat at Arthur, grabbing his arm. "Are you deaf? I told you to stay away from these degenerates." Before Arthur could even flinch, a shadow fell over them. Bear had moved from his booth to the door without a sound. He stood there, flanked by two of his largest men, their arms crossed. They didn't say a word. They just blocked the path to the car. Vincent looked up, his arrogance faltering for the first time. "What do you want? This is a family matter." Bear took a slow step forward. He was a good foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than Vincent, and he used every inch of it to intimidate. "We're his family now," Bear said, his voice a low, chilling growl. "And we need to have a little chat. About finances." The color drained from Vincent's face. He tried to puff out his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You've been cashing Arthur's pension checks for the last 2 years. Another biker, Roadblock, stated calmly. He was holding a file folder. Social Security, veterans benefits, totals out to about $74,000. We had a friend run the numbers. Vincent's jaw dropped. "How?" "You left his mail in the back seat of your unlocked car," Bear said, a hint of disgust in his tone. "You're not just a thief, you're a stupid one." He took another step, cornering Vincent against the side of his own car. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over your car keys, your wallet, and the keys to Arthur's house. You're going to sign this paper here." Roadblock produced a document and a pen, which gives Arthur full power of attorney. "Then you're going to walk away and never come within 100 miles of this town again. If we ever see your face again, we'll be very unhappy." There was no threat of violence. There didn't need to be. The menace was in their stillness, in the cold certainty in their eyes. Vincent was trembling, his pathetic bravado shattered. He looked from Bear to the other bikers, who had formed a silent, impassable semicircle around him. He was utterly and completely trapped. He snatched the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely sign his name. He threw the keys and wallet on the ground and, without another word, turned and practically ran down the road. Not even looking back, the bikers didn't watch him go. Their attention turned to Arthur, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes. He looked at Bear, his expression a mixture of awe and overwhelming gratitude. Tears began to stream down his wrinkled face, the first tears he had allowed himself to cry in years. Bear put a heavy, gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. "It's over, old-timer," he said softly. "You're safe now." Maya watched from the diner doorway, her own tears blurring her vision. Arthur stumbled forward and wrapped his thin arms around Bear's waist in a desperate hug. The giant biker stiffened for a moment, surprised, then relaxed, his own large arms coming up to pat the old man's back in a gesture of awkward, profound comfort. The rest of the chapter watched in silence, their hardened faces softened by the raw, emotional scene unfolding before them. It was the beginning of a new chapter, for all of them. That evening, the bikers didn't take Arthur to a shelter. They took him to their clubhouse, a modest, fortified building on the outskirts of town. The place was rough, smelling of stale beer, oil, and leather, but it was warm and it was safe. Stitch, the young prospect, showed Arthur to a small, clean spare room. Another biker brought him a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, thick slices of bread, and a tall glass of milk. It was the first full, hot meal he'd had in over a year. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, his hands shaking with emotion rather than hunger. While Arthur rested, Bear and Roadblock went to his house. It was a small, neglected bungalow, but what they found inside stopped them in their tracks. Vincent had treated the place like a dumpster, but he had left Arthur's personal effects untouched in a single dusty footlocker in the attic. Inside, beneath a layer of moth-eaten blankets, was a life story. There was a neatly folded army dress uniform, the jacket heavy with medals, a purple heart, a silver star, a bronze star with a V for valor. There were faded black and white photographs of a handsome young soldier in Korea, his eyes bright and full of fire. There were newspaper clippings from his hometown paper, detailing his heroism during a brutal, forgotten battle where Sergeant Arthur Pendleton had single-handedly held off an enemy advance, saving the lives of his entire platoon. He wasn't just an old man. He was a hero, a genuine, decorated American hero who had been left to starve by the very country he had bled for, and by a family that saw him only as a piggy bank. Bear held the silver star in his palm, the weight of it feeling heavier than stone. He looked at the photo of the young, strong soldier, and then thought of the frail, broken man sleeping in their clubhouse. A quiet, cold fury settled deep in his bones. It was a desecration. Their chapter was made up of outcasts and misfits, men who lived by their own code, but it was a code of honor, and there was no greater dishonor than abandoning one of your own. Arthur, they decided, without a single word needing to be spoken, was now one of them. They brought the footlocker back to the clubhouse. The next morning, they presented it to Arthur. He opened it, and as his trembling fingers traced the edges of the medals and the faces in the photographs, his stooped shoulders began to straighten. It was as if he was remembering the man he used to be. I thought these were all lost, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Nothing's lost for good, Bear said gruffly, standing beside him. Sometimes it just needs to be found. The transformation was slow, but it was profound. The Angels officially adopted Arthur. They used the money they'd recovered from Vincent to fix up his house, but Arthur preferred to stay at the clubhouse. He said it was less lonely. They made sure he got to his doctor's appointments. They took him to the VA to get his benefits reinstated under his own name. In return, Arthur gave them something they didn't know they were missing. He had been a master mechanic in his youth, and his knowledge of engines, especially the old classics, was encyclopedic. He started spending his days in their garage, his old, gnarled hands showing the younger members how to fine-tune a carburetor or rebuild a transmission with a precision that was artistry. He moved with a newfound purpose, the fog of despair lifting from his eyes, replaced by a familiar, focused spark. He would tell them stories, not just of the war, but of the world he grew up in. He spoke of a time when honor and a man's word meant everything. His stories of brotherhood, in the face of death, resonated deeply with the bikers' own fierce loyalty to their patch. He wasn't just a charity case. He became their elder, their confidant, their link to a more honorable past. The bond between Arthur and Bear was the most remarkable of all. The quiet, intimidating president would sit with the old soldier for hours in the evenings, the two of them sharing a comfortable silence or listening to old records on a vintage turntable Arthur had fixed. Bear, who had never known his own father, found a paternal figure in Arthur, and Arthur, whose own son had died years ago, found a new son in the unlikeliest of men. One evening, As a toast, Bear raised his beer bottle. "To Arthur," he said, his voice ringing through the clubhouse. The entire chapter roared in response, raising their own drinks, for reminding us what a real soldier looks like. Arthur, sitting in a worn armchair they'd declared his permanent throne, simply smiled. It was a genuine, radiant smile that reached his eyes. He was home. Years melted away. Arthur's health, buoyed by good, food, safety, and a sense of purpose, remained steady for a long time. He became a fixture in the town, always riding in the sidecar of Bear's Harley during charity toy runs. A proud Hells Angels supporter patch stitched onto his favorite jacket. The townsfolk who once looked away from the starving old man now greeted him with smiles and respect. They knew his story. They knew he was protected. Maya finished community college and got her nursing degree. She never lost touch with the club. She was family now, too. She'd stop by the diner on her days off, and Bear would always buy her a coffee, the two of them sharing a quiet understanding. She had been the catalyst, the small voice that had changed everything. Her single act of courage had rippled outwards, saving one man's life and enriching the lives of a dozen more. Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep, 5 years after Maya first handed him that sandwich. He was 87 years old. The entire chapter gave him a funeral with full honors, a procession of roaring motorcycles that stretched for over a mile. They buried him with his medals, and on his gravestone, beneath his name and rank, they had a single line engraved: "Our brother, never forgotten." Even after he was gone, his presence remained. The clubhouse garage had a new name painted over the door: Sergeant Pendleton's Chop Shop. His armchair remained empty in the corner, a silent memorial. The younger bikers spoke of him with reverence, telling the new prospects the story of the old soldier who became an angel. He had changed them, softened their roughest edges, and reinforced the code of loyalty that held them together. Sometimes, when the world feels dark and cruel, it's easy to believe that heroism is dead. We look for saviors in capes or uniforms, for grand gestures that will change the world in an instant. But true courage, the kind that really matters, is often quieter. It's found in the 19-year-old waitress who decides to speak up for a stranger. It's found in the hardened biker who listens. It's the choice to see the humanity in someone everyone else has thrown away. Heroes are all around us, hidden in plain sight. They are the people who pay attention, who trust their instincts when something feels wrong, and who have the courage to offer a hand, not out of pity, but out of a shared sense of decency. Never underestimate the power of a small, brave voice. It can be the one thing that saves a life, builds a family, and reminds us all of what we're capable of when we choose to care.